They thought painting "worthless Asian lover" and other vile slurs across Ashley Chen's dorm locker would finally break the quiet transfer student who dared to show up at their elite university. For 3 months, Brad Morrison and his entitled fraternity crew had systematically targeted every girl who didn't fit their narrow definition of worthy, using psychological warfare that had driven 2 previous students to transfer out in tears. But when they cornered Ashley in the empty martial arts studio at midnight, expecting another easy victim to crumble under their relentless harassment, they had no idea they were about to face 8 years of disciplined fury unleashed in under 60 seconds. Ashley Chen had transferred to Westmont University with one simple goal: complete her senior year in biomedical engineering quietly, avoid drama, and land the research position at Johns Hopkins that would launch her medical career. At 22, she'd already survived 3 different colleges due to her father's military transfers, and she'd learned that keeping her head down was the safest strategy in environments where she didn't quite fit the typical mold. Standing 5'6" with shoulder-length black hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, Ashley dressed in oversized hoodies and jeans that deliberately downplayed her athletic build. What her classmates didn't know was that beneath her reserved exterior lay 8 years of rigorous martial arts training, including a second-degree black belt in Shotokan karate and competitive experience in mixed martial arts tournaments across 3 states. Her dorm room in Harrison Hall was spartanly furnished, just the essentials for someone who viewed college as a stepping stone rather than a social experience. The only personal touches were a small photo of her parents at her black belt ceremony and a carefully maintained collection of martial arts manuals hidden in her closet. Ashley had made a conscious decision to keep her fighting background secret after an incident at her previous university where jealous classmates had tried to goad her into demonstrations, ultimately turning her skills into a spectacle rather than respecting the discipline behind them. The university's martial arts club met 3 times a week in the basement of the recreation center, and Ashley had quietly joined without fanfare, attending the beginner sessions to avoid drawing attention to her advanced abilities. She sparred carefully, always holding back, always letting others appear more skilled than they were. The instructor, a part-time graduate student named David, had no idea that Ashley could probably teach the class herself. She found the controlled environment soothing, a place where she could channel her energy without the social complications that seemed to follow her everywhere else. But Westmont University had its own particular brand of toxic culture that Ashley hadn't anticipated. The campus was dominated by old money and legacy students, kids whose parents' donations had built entire buildings and whose last names appeared on plaques throughout the quad. Within this privileged ecosystem, certain students operated with virtual impunity, protected by family connections and an administration more concerned with preserving donor relationships than addressing behavioral problems. Brad Morrison was the epitome of this protected class. 23 years old, standing 6'2" with the broad shoulders of a former high school football star who'd never quite made it to college-level athletics. Brad compensated for his athletic disappointment by establishing dominance through other means. His father, Robert Morrison III, sat on the university's board of trustees and had endowed the Morrison Business Leadership Center. His mother chaired the Alumni Association's most prestigious fundraising committee. This family influence had created an invisible shield around Brad and his inner circle, allowing them to operate a systematic campaign of harassment against students they deemed unworthy of Westmont's prestigious halls. Brad's crew consisted of 3 equally privileged and equally vindictive young men. Tyler Hammond, the son of a tech mogul, served as Brad's primary strategist, the one who planned their psychological campaigns with methodical precision. Derek Walsh, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels, handled the technical aspects of their harassment, managing fake social media accounts and coordinating digital attacks. Kevin Stark, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, provided the muscle when intimidation required a physical presence. Together, They had perfected a system of targeted harassment that focused primarily on female students who, in their view, didn't belong at their elite institution. They particularly targeted women of color, international students, and anyone who appeared to be on financial aid. Their methods were sophisticated enough to avoid obvious disciplinary action while being devastating enough to drive their victims away. They called it maintaining standards, but it was pure cruelty disguised as social gatekeeping. Ashley first appeared on their radar during her 3rd week at Westmont. She'd been sitting alone in the campus coffee shop, studying biochemistry, while eating a simple sandwich she'd made in her dorm room's tiny kitchenette. Brad and his crew occupied their usual table near the front windows, holding court like kings, surveying their domain. Tyler had noticed her first, pointing out her worn backpack and non-designer clothes. Transfer student, he'd whispered to Brad. Probably scholarship? Definitely doesn't belong here. Brad had studied Ashley with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. He saw someone who fit their preferred target profile perfectly. Quiet, solitary, apparently vulnerable, and clearly from a different socioeconomic background than the typical Westmont student. What he couldn't see, was the controlled alertness in Ashley's posture, the way her eyes occasionally swept the room with tactical awareness, the unconscious balance in how she held herself, even while sitting. These were markers of someone who'd been trained to fight, but they were subtle enough to escape notice from someone who'd never faced real danger. The campaign against Ashley began subtly, as it always did. Tyler created fake social media accounts to send her anonymous messages questioning her admission to Westmont, suggesting she'd taken a spot that belonged to a more deserving student. Derek hacked into the university's housing system to discover her financial aid status, then spread rumors about her charity case background. Kevin started showing up at places where Ashley studied, creating an atmosphere of vague menace without doing anything overt enough to trigger disciplinary action. But Ashley had dealt with bullies before, and she recognized the pattern. At her previous universities, she'd learned that responding to indirect harassment often escalated situations unnecessarily. Her strategy was to document everything while maintaining her focus on academics. She screenshotted the anonymous messages, noted the timing of Kevin's intimidating appearances, and kept detailed records of every incident. She'd learned from experience that eventually, bullies either got bored or made a mistake that exposed them to consequences. What Ashley didn't anticipate was the particular persistence of Brad's crew or the extent of their protection within the university system. When she reported the anonymous messages to campus security, the officer who took her statement was Derek's fraternity brother. When she tried to discuss the harassment with her academic advisor, she discovered that Tyler's mother served on the committee that determined scholarship renewals. The system that should have protected her was compromised by the same network of privilege that empowered her harassers. The harassment escalated as autumn progressed. Ashley found her bike tires slashed twice in 1 week. Her laptop mysteriously disappeared from her dorm room despite the door being locked, reappearing 3 days later in a campus bathroom with several important files corrupted. Someone had signed her up for dozens of unwanted mailing lists and subscription services, flooding her email and causing her to miss important academic communications. Each incident was designed to disrupt her studies and create constant stress without leaving clear fingerprints of responsibility. The psychological pressure was exactly what Brad's crew intended. They wanted Ashley to feel isolated, overwhelmed, and ultimately motivated to transfer rather than continue fighting. They'd successfully driven away 11 students over the past 2 years, using similar tactics, and they were confident that Ashley would become victim number 12. What they failed to understand was that Ashley's martial arts training had prepared her for more than just physical confrontation. It had taught her mental resilience, emotional control, and strategic thinking. Instead of cracking under pressure, Ashley began adapting. She installed security cameras in her dorm room, started varying her daily routines to avoid predictable patterns, and began networking with other students who'd been targeted by similar harassment. She discovered a quiet underground network of Westmont students who'd learned to support each other against the toxic culture perpetuated by privileged bullies. This network shared information, provided emotional support, and helped document patterns of abuse that individual victims couldn't establish alone. Through this network, Ashley learned that Brad's crew had a predictable escalation pattern. They typically moved from anonymous digital harassment to property destruction to psychological intimidation to a final, dramatic confrontation designed to publicly humiliate their target. The confrontation usually involved cornering the victim in an isolated location, delivering a devastating verbal assault, and often included some form of physical intimidation that stopped just short of assault. Witnesses were always either crew members or their sympathizers, ensuring that any reports to authorities could be contradicted by multiple reliable testimonies. Knowing this pattern, Ashley began preparing for the inevitable confrontation. She started carrying a voice recorder during her daily routines. She mapped out the campus locations where previous confrontations had occurred, noting security camera blind spots and escape routes. Most importantly, she began subtly testing her martial arts skills during the club sessions, gradually revealing more of her capabilities to gauge whether she could count on support from fellow martial artists if needed. The final escalation came during finals week in December. Ashley had been pulling all-nighters in the library, trying to maintain her perfect GPA despite the constant harassment. The stress was wearing on her, and she'd started making small mistakes, forgetting to lock her dorm room door, walking alone through poorly lit areas of campus, letting her guard down when exhaustion overwhelmed her usual caution. Brad's crew saw these signs of weakness and decided it was time for the final phase of their campaign. They'd been watching Ashley's schedule, noting that she always used the martial arts studio for late-night practice sessions when the stress became overwhelming. The studio was located in the basement of the recreation center, isolated from campus security patrols and beyond the range of most security cameras. It was the perfect location for a confrontation that would leave no witnesses except their own. On a Tuesday night in December, Ashley arrived at the martial arts studio around 11 p.m., expecting to find it empty as usual. The basement hallway was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights that created an ominous atmosphere. As she approached her locker outside the studio, she froze in shock. Across the metal surface, someone had spray-painted a collection of vile racial and sexual slurs in red paint that looked disturbingly like blood in the poor lighting. The words were chosen specifically to wound "worthless Asian lover," "scholarship sleut," "yellow fever victim," and other degrading phrases that attacked both her ethnicity and her gender. But it was the final message that revealed the true intent: transfer or face the consequences. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was a direct threat. Ashley's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to photograph the vandalism. 8 years of martial arts training had taught her to remain calm under pressure. But this attack felt different. It was personal in a way that transcended mere bullying. Someone had invested significant time and energy into creating this monument to hatred, and they'd chosen this isolated location specifically to ensure she'd face it alone. As she finished documenting the vandalism, Ashley heard footsteps echoing in the hallway behind her. She turned to see Brad Morrison and his 3 companions emerging from the shadows near the stairwell. They'd been waiting for her, timing their approach to maximize the psychological impact of discovering the vandalized locker in their presence. Brad wore a satisfied smirk that confirmed Ashley's suspicions about who was responsible for the graffiti. Tyler carried a gym bag that seemed heavier than necessary for a workout. Derek held his phone, obviously recording the encounter. Kevin had positioned himself near the stairwell exit, blocking Ashley's most obvious escape route. Well, Brad said, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Looks like someone left you a message. Pretty clear message. 2. He gestured toward the vandalized locker with mock sympathy. "Must be hard being somewhere you don't belong." Ashley forced herself to remain calm. Though her heart was racing with adrenaline, She could feel the familiar surge of energy that preceded combat, but she also recognized this as exactly the type of confrontation her harassers wanted. They were trying to provoke her into either breaking down or lashing out, either of which would serve their purposes. "Did you do this?" Ashley asked quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Tyler laughed, pulling out his phone to join Derek in recording. "Do what? We just got here. Looks like you've got some enemies." "Scholarship girl." Kevin stepped closer, using his larger frame to create a sense of physical threat without technically making contact. "Maybe someone's trying to give you helpful advice. Westmont isn't for everyone. Some people just can't handle the standards here." Ashley's martial arts training kicked in automatically. She subtly shifted her stance to improve her balance and positioning. Her breathing became controlled and rhythmic. Her peripheral vision expanded to track all 4 opponents simultaneously. Most importantly, her mind began calculating distances, angles, and tactical options. "I belong here as much as anyone," Ashley said, keeping her tone level. "I was accepted on merit." "Same as you." Brad's smirk widened into something uglier. "Merit? Is that what they're calling affirmative action these days?" He stepped closer. Close enough that Ashley could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the beer on his breath. "Listen, transfer girl. This is your last warning. Some of us have worked too hard to maintain Westmont's reputation to let it get dragged down by charity cases." The racial undertones in Brad's words were unmistakable, and Ashley felt a cold fury building beneath her controlled exterior. This wasn't just about college politics or social hierarchy. This was about fundamental human dignity and respect. These privileged boys believed they had the right to determine who belonged in their world based on race, class, and gender. "I'm not going anywhere," Ashley said quietly, but with a firmness that surprised even her harassers. Derek lowered his phone, apparently recognizing that the conversation wasn't going according to their usual script. Previous victims had either fled in tears or lashed out in ways that could be used against them. Ashley's calm resistance was disrupting their proven formula. Tyler opened his gym bag and pulled out a can of spray paint, the same red color that decorated Ashley's locker. "Maybe you need a more personal reminder of where you stand," he said, tossing the can from hand to hand. "How about we give you some artwork that'll really help you remember your place?" The threat was now explicit and immediate. Ashley realized that they intended to spray paint her directly, probably her clothes and possibly her skin, creating a humiliating assault that would be difficult to prove as anything more than a prank. It was a calculated escalation designed to break her spirit completely. Kevin moved to grab Ashley's arm, apparently intending to hold her while Tyler applied the spray paint. It was exactly the physical contact Ashley had been waiting for. The moment when their harassment crossed the line into assault and her response became legally justified self-defense. As Kevin's hand reached for her shoulder, Ashley moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd been training for this moment her entire life. She stepped slightly to her left, causing Kevin's grab to miss its target, then pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow into his solar plexus with controlled force. Kevin doubled over, gasping for breath, stumbling backward into Derek. The speed and precision of Ashley's movement shocked everyone in the hallway, including Ashley herself. She'd never used her full martial arts skills in a real confrontation before, and the effectiveness was both satisfying and terrifying. Brad's confident expression evaporated instantly. What the hell was that? Tyler dropped the spray paint can, which clattered across the floor, echoing in the sudden silence. Derek struggled to untangle himself from Kevin, who was still wheezing and trying to catch his breath. Ashley settled into a formal fighting stance, her body language completely transformed from quiet victim to dangerous opponent. 8 years of Shotokan karate, she said calmly. 2nd-degree black belt, state champion in sparring competition 2 years running. The revelation hit Brad's crew like a physical blow. Everything they thought they knew about Ashley, her vulnerability, her helplessness, her inevitable surrender, had been completely wrong. They'd been stalking and harassing someone who possessed the skills to defend herself effectively, and they'd just provided her with legal justification to use those skills. Brad, to his credit, recognized the dramatic shift in power dynamics. "Now wait a minute," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "We weren't actually going to hurt you. This was just supposed to be a conversation." Ashley didn't relax hair. "Stanza. A conversation? With spray paint and physical intimidation in an isolated location while being recorded?" She gestured toward Derek's phone. "That's not a conversation. That's assault and harassment." Kevin finally straightened up, his face red with embarrassment and residual pain. "You can't just attack people like that. I was barely touching you." "Self-defense," Ashley said simply. "You reached for me without permission after making threats. I responded with minimum necessary force to protect myself." Tyler, always the strategist, tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding here. We came down to work out and found you vandalizing your own locker. When we tried to stop you, you attacked us." Ashley almost smiled at the predictable attempt to flip the narrative. "Interesting theory. Let's see how it holds up when campus security reviews the security footage from the hallway cameras." She gestured toward two small cameras that Brad's crew had apparently failed to notice in their planning. The devices were partially hidden by pipe fixtures, but they had clear sight lines to the locker area and the confrontation zone. Derek's face went pale as he realized their mistake. "Those cameras don't work. The rec center shuts down all non-essential systems after 10 p.m. Actually," Ashley said, "they upgraded to a new system last month. Motion-activated recording with cloud backup. I checked with campus security after my bike was vandalized. Everything that's happened here tonight is being recorded in real time." The lie was delivered with such confidence that even Ashley almost believed it herself. In reality, she had no idea whether the cameras were functional. But Brad's crew couldn't take the risk of calling her bluff. Brad's strategic mind kicked into damage control mode. If video evidence existed of them threatening Ashley with spray paint and grabbing her, their privilege protection wouldn't save them from assault charges. Worse, the vandalized locker would be impossible to explain away if investigators connected them to the scene. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand," Brad said, trying to project reasonableness. "Obviously there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We should all just walk away and forget this happened." Ashley studied the four young men who minutes earlier had seemed so threatening and powerful. Now they looked like what they really were: spoiled children who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. Kevin was still breathing heavily from her elbow strike. Derek clutched his phone like a security blanket. Tyler's confident smirk had been replaced by nervous uncertainty. Brad, despite his attempts to maintain control, couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. "Walk away?" Ashley repeated. "After 3 months of harassment? After vandalizing my locker with racial slurs? After threatening me with assault?" She shook her head. "I don't think so." Kevin, apparently recovering his misplaced confidence, took a step forward. "Listen, karate girl, you might know some moves, but there are 4 of us, and one of you. Don't let one lucky shot go to your head." It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Ashley's training had prepared her for multiple attackers, and Kevin's threat provided additional justification for whatever defensive measures she might need to take. More importantly, his words revealed that Brad's crew still didn't understand the fundamental shift that had occurred in their power dynamic. Ashley shifted smoothly into a fighting stance that allowed her to monitor all 4 opponents simultaneously. "Lucky shot," she said, her voice carrying a new edge. "That was me holding back. Would you like to see what happens when I don't?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kevin looked to Brad for support, but found his leader frozen with indecision. Derek continued recording, apparently hoping to capture something that could be used to their advantage later. Tyler backed toward the stairwell, clearly preferring retreat to confrontation. Brad made the decision for all of them. "Kevin, stand down. Everyone just calm down." He looked directly at Ashley. trying to project authority he no longer possessed. "You've made your point. We'll stay away from you. You stay away from us. Deal?" Ashley considered the offer for a moment, recognizing it as a face-saving gesture that would allow Brad's crew to retreat without admitting complete defeat. But she also knew that accepting it would accomplish nothing. They'd continue harassing other students, and they'd probably find subtler ways to target her in the future. "No deal," Ashley said firmly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to clean up this graffiti tonight. You're going to reimburse me for the damaged property from your previous harassment. And you're going to stay away from me and every other student you've been targeting." Kevin laughed derisively. "Or what? You'll karate chop us to death?" Ashley moved so quickly that her motion was almost a blur. She stepped forward, grabbed Kevin's wrist in a joint lock that immediately brought him to his knees, and held him there for just long enough to demonstrate complete control. Then she released him and stepped back before anyone could react. "Or I'll press charges for everything you've done over the past 3 months," Ashley said calmly. "Harassment, intimidation, property destruction, vandalism, and now assault. I've documented everything, and I'm confident the district attorney will be very interested in prosecuting the sons of such prominent families." The threat was devastating because it was entirely credible. Ashley's documentation of their harassment campaign, combined with video evidence of tonight's confrontation, would create a legal case that even their family connections couldn't easily dismiss. More importantly, the public nature of such charges would damage their families' reputations in ways that went far beyond personal consequences. Derek finally stopped recording, apparently realizing that any footage he captured was more likely to incriminate them than to help their cause. Tyler edged closer to the stairwell, clearly ready to flee if the situation deteriorated further. Kevin remained on his knees, staring at Ashley with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. Brad's face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, fear, calculation, and finally resignation. He'd built his entire college identity around the ability to intimidate and control others. But Ashley had shattered that identity in less than 5 minutes. Everything he thought he knew about power dynamics had been proven wrong. "What do you want?" Brad asked quietly. Ashley considered her answer carefully. She could have demanded that they be expelled, or that their families be notified, or that they face criminal charges. But she recognized that completely destroying them might not serve her long-term interests or help other potential victims. "I want accountability," Ashley said. "Clean up the graffiti. Publicly apologize to the students you've harassed. Submit to counseling about harassment and cultural sensitivity. And if I hear about you targeting anyone else, all bets are off." It was a reasonable offer that provided them with a path to redemption while ensuring real consequences for their actions. Brad looked to his companions, reading the fear and uncertainty in their faces. They were no longer the confident predators who'd entered the hallway an hour earlier. "Fine," Brad said after a long pause. "We'll clean it up." Tyler pulled cleaning supplies from his gym bag. Apparently they'd come prepared to clean up evidence if necessary. As the 4 young men began scrubbing the spray paint from Ashley's locker, she watched with satisfaction. The symbolic reversal was complete. Her tormentors were literally cleaning up their own mess while she stood guard. The cleaning process took nearly an hour, during which almost no words were exchanged. Ashley maintained her vigilant stance, ensuring that the job was done thoroughly. Kevin kept glancing at her nervously, clearly awed by the fighting skills she'd demonstrated. Derek had put away his phone entirely. Recognizing that recording their humiliation served no useful purpose, Tyler worked methodically, his strategic mind probably already planning how to minimize the damage to their reputations. Brad supervised the cleaning with the grim efficiency of someone who understood that his old life was over. The privilege and protection he'd relied upon hadn't disappeared, but his ability to use them aggressively had been permanently compromised. Ashley's response had proven that victims could fight back effectively, and that knowledge would change how he approached every future interaction. When the locker was finally clean, The four young men stood before Ashley like defeated soldiers, awaiting further orders. The power dynamic had been completely reversed. She was now the one who controlled the situation and determined what happened next. "The apologies start tomorrow," Ashley said. "I'll provide you with a list of the students you need to contact. The counseling sessions begin next week. And remember, I'll be watching." Brad nodded reluctantly. "Understood." As the four young men filed up the stairs, Ashley finally allowed herself to relax. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a complex mixture of satisfaction, relief, and amazement at what she'd accomplished. She'd faced down her tormentors and emerged victorious, but more importantly, she'd proven to herself that her years of training had been worthwhile. Over the following weeks, the changes on campus were dramatic and far-reaching. Brad's crew, true to their agreement, began reaching out to their former victims with awkward but apparently sincere apologies. Several students reported that the harassment they'd been experiencing had suddenly stopped. The toxic culture of entitlement that had poisoned campus life began to shift as word spread about the confrontation in the rec center. Ashley found herself in an unexpected position as other students began approaching her for advice and support. Her demonstration that bullies could be effectively confronted had inspired victims throughout the campus community. She started an informal support group that met weekly in the martial arts studio, teaching basic self-defense techniques while providing a safe space for students to share their experiences. The university administration, initially resistant to acknowledging the harassment problem, was forced to take action when several families threatened legal action based on Ashley's documentation of systematic abuse. New policies were implemented to address bullying and harassment, and additional security measures were installed throughout campus. Brad Morrison and his companions completed their mandatory counseling sessions and maintained their agreement to avoid further harassment. Brad, in particular, seemed genuinely changed by the experience. He began volunteering with diversity and inclusion programs, apparently seeking to atone for his previous behavior. Whether this transformation was genuine or strategic remained unclear, but the practical effect was the same. The campus became safer for everyone. Ashley's academic performance, freed from the constant stress of harassment, improved dramatically. She graduated summa cum laude and was accepted into Johns Hopkins Medical School with a full scholarship. Her senior thesis on the psychological effects of harassment in academic environments was published in a prestigious journal and became required reading in several university administration programs. The martial arts club grew exponentially as students sought to develop the same confidence and capabilities that Ashley had demonstrated. The university expanded the program and hired additional instructors to meet demand. Ashley served as a volunteer assistant instructor during her final semester, helping other students develop not just fighting techniques, but the mental discipline and emotional control that made her confrontation successful. The story of Ashley's stand against her harassers spread beyond Westmont University, inspiring similar actions at colleges across the country. Her documentation methods were adopted by student advocacy groups as a model for gathering evidence of harassment. Her tactical approach to confrontation, using minimal necessary force while maintaining legal and moral high ground, became a case study in effective self-defense. Years later, when Ashley was completing her medical residency, she received a letter from a young woman at another university who had successfully used Ashley's example to confront her own harassers. The letter reminded Ashley that individual acts of courage could create ripple effects that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. The privileged bullies who had once terrorized Westmont's campus learned that power based on family connections and social position was ultimately fragile when confronted by someone with genuine strength and determination. Ashley's 8 years of martial arts training had prepared her for much more than physical confrontation. They had taught her the mental discipline to remain calm under pressure, the strategic thinking to plan her response effectively, and the moral confidence to stand up for what was right. The vandalized locker that had once displayed messages of hatred was eventually replaced But Ashley kept photos of the original graffiti as a reminder of how far she'd come. The racist and sexist slurs that were meant to drive her away had instead become symbols of her triumph over ignorance and cruelty. In the end, the bullies who thought they could break Ashley's spirit discovered that they had chosen the wrong target. Her quiet demeanor had hidden not weakness but strength, and her apparent vulnerability had masked years of preparation for exactly the type of confrontation they had forced upon her. The karate black belt's epic takedown became legendary not just for its physical effectiveness, but for its demonstration that victims could become victors when they refused to accept the roles that others tried to impose upon them. The lesson resonated far beyond one university campus. Respect must be earned through character and conduct, not inherited through privilege and position. And sometimes, when words and policies fail to create change, a single moment of perfectly applied force can shatter systems of oppression that seemed immutable. Ashley's story proved that bullies, no matter how powerful they appear, are ultimately cowards who prey on perceived weakness. When confronted by genuine strength, physical, mental, and moral, their elaborate facades crumble instantly. The quiet girl they had tried to break became the force that broke their reign of terror, transforming not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who learned that fighting back was possible. The epic takedown in the martial arts studio lasted less than 5 minutes, but its effects continued for years, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single person's refusal to accept injustice silently. The transformation of Westmont University's culture didn't happen overnight, but the ripple effects of Ashley's confrontation continued expanding throughout the academic year and beyond. What began as one student's refusal to be victimized evolved into a comprehensive reform movement that changed how the institution addressed power dynamics, privilege, and accountability. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, Westmont's Dean of Student Affairs, had initially been skeptical when Ashley first reported the harassment months earlier. Like many administrators at elite institutions, Thornfield had learned to navigate carefully around influential donors and board members. But when Ashley's documented evidence and the security footage from the rec center confrontation became undeniable, Thornfield found herself leading the most significant policy overhaul in the university's 150-year history. The new anti-harassment protocols that emerged were unprecedented in their scope and enforcement mechanisms. Every student organization was required to undergo bias training. Faculty members received mandatory education about recognizing and addressing harassment. Most significantly, a new judicial board was established, with rotating membership specifically designed to prevent the concentration of power that had previously protected privileged students. Brad Morrison's father, Robert Morrison III, initially attempted to use his board influence to minimize his son's consequences. He arranged private meetings with university officials, threatened to withdraw funding, and even hired a public relations firm to manage the family's reputation. But Ashley's meticulous documentation and the viral nature of her story on social media created pressure that even the Morrison family's resources couldn't contain. The turning point came when Sarah Kim, a sophomore who had transferred out the previous year due to harassment from Brad's crew, returned to campus specifically to testify about her experiences. Sarah's parents had initially chosen silence to protect their daughter's academic future, but Ashley's example inspired them to speak publicly. Sarah's testimony, combined with statements from 6 other former victims, created a pattern of abuse that the university could no longer ignore. Tyler Hammond's tech mogul father took a different approach, publicly supporting the university's reforms and donating additional funds for diversity programs. This strategic response protected his family's reputation while distancing them from the harassment scandal. Tyler himself seemed genuinely affected by the counseling process, eventually changing his major from business to social work and dedicating his senior thesis to studying the psychology of privilege and entitlement. Derek Walsh's hotel magnate family faced the most severe consequences when local news outlets connected the harassment story to previous complaints at several of their luxury properties. The negative publicity forced them to implement company-wide anti-discrimination training and hire a chief diversity officer. Derek transferred to another university midway through the semester. Apparently unable to handle the social consequences of his actions, Kevin Stark's pharmaceutical heiress mother surprised everyone by becoming one of the most vocal advocates for reform. She established an endowment specifically for students from underrepresented backgrounds and insisted that Kevin complete community service hours at a local immigrant assistance center. Kevin's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. He eventually became a peer counselor and worked closely with Ashley's support group. The martial arts program that Ashley had helped expand became a model for other universities dealing with campus safety issues. Dr. James Martinez, the new program director hired specifically to manage the increased enrollment, worked with Ashley to develop a curriculum that emphasized not just physical techniques, but emotional regulation and conflict de-escalation. The program attracted students from diverse backgrounds who found community in the shared pursuit of discipline and self-improvement. Ashley's support group evolved into a formal organization called the Westmont Alliance for Student Safety, with official university recognition and funding. The group met weekly in the renovated rec center, which had been upgraded with better lighting and security systems following the confrontation. What started as informal self-defense lessons expanded to include workshops on documentation techniques, legal rights awareness, and bystander intervention training. The Alliance partnered with local law enforcement to provide students with direct access to resources and reporting mechanisms that bypassed potentially compromised university channels. Detective Linda Foster, a specialist in harassment and stalking cases, became a regular presenter at Alliance meetings and helped several students navigate legal proceedings against their harassers. One of the most significant long-term impacts was the creation of the Morrison Accountability Scholarship, ironically funded by the Morrison family as part of their effort to repair their reputation. The scholarship provided full tuition support for students from backgrounds underrepresented at Westmont, along with mentorship programs and leadership development opportunities. Ashley was selected as the first recipient coordinator, helping design selection criteria that emphasized resilience and community service. The media attention surrounding Ashley's story attracted interest from researchers studying campus culture and harassment prevention. Dr. Patricia Williams from the National Institute of Campus Safety visited Westmont to conduct interviews and observe the new programs in action. Her subsequent research paper, citing Ashley's case as a breakthrough example of effective victim response, influenced policy development at universities nationwide. Ashley's own academic trajectory continued to flourish as she gained confidence in her abilities beyond martial arts. She started a research project examining the neurological effects of chronic stress from harassment, working directly with Professor Rachel Goldman in the neuroscience department. The research, which used anonymous surveys from Ashley's support group members as data sources, revealed measurable impacts on cognitive function and emotional regulation that persisted even after harassment ended. The project attracted attention from Johns Hopkins Medical School, where Ashley's eventual mentor, Dr. Michael Chen, no relation, was researching trauma-informed approaches to medical education. Dr. Chen visited Westmont during Ashley's senior year and was so impressed by her research, methodology, and leadership skills that he advocated personally for her admission with full fellowship support. During her final semester, Ashley was invited to speak at the university's annual leadership conference, an event traditionally dominated by business and political speakers. Her presentation, titled "The Power of Documented Truth," drew the largest audience in the conference's history and was later posted online, where it garnered over 2 million views and inspired similar advocacy efforts at dozens of other institutions. The impact extended beyond Westmont's campus boundaries into the surrounding community, Local businesses that had previously catered primarily to wealthy students began actively recruiting diverse customers and implementing inclusive practices. The changes were partly driven by economic considerations. The negative publicity around campus harassment had affected tourism and local spending, but they created lasting improvements in community relations. Ashley's parents, who had worried constantly about their daughter's safety and academic success, found themselves unexpectedly proud of her newfound public profile. Her father, Colonel David Chen, spoke at a military leadership conference about lessons his daughter had taught him regarding the intersection of physical training and moral courage. Her mother, Dr. Lisa Chen, incorporated Ashley's documentation strategies into her own research on workplace harassment in medical settings. The story took on international dimensions when the Chinese American Student Association featured Ashley's experience in their newsletter, which was distributed to chapters at universities across North America. Similar student organizations at other institutions reached out for advice on developing their own safety programs and advocacy strategies. By graduation day, Ashley had become something she never intended to be, a symbol of resistance against institutional indifference and privileged impunity. The quiet transfer student who just wanted to complete her degree had transformed into a nationally recognized advocate whose strategies were being implemented at universities from coast to coast. The commencement ceremony itself reflected the changes Ashley had helped catalyze. The keynote speaker was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney and former harassment victim who had used documentation and legal action to reform her own institution. Dr. Rodriguez specifically mentioned Ashley's case as an example of how individual courage could create systemic change. As Ashley walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. In the audience, she could see members of her support group, martial arts students she had trained, and even Tyler Hammond and Kevin Stark, both of whom had worked hard to redeem themselves following their participation in the harassment campaign. The final validation came 6 months after graduation, when Ashley received a letter from Westmont's new president announcing that the university had achieved recognition as a national leader in harassment prevention and campus safety. The letter specifically credited Ashley's advocacy and the programs she had helped establish as primary factors in the university's transformation, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in smaller, more personal forms. Thank you notes from students who had found the courage to report their own harassers, emails from parents whose children felt safe at Westmont for the first time, and messages from administrators at other universities asking for guidance on implementing similar reforms. Ashley's 8 years of martial arts training had prepared her for a single moment of physical confrontation, but the skills she developed in documentation, advocacy, and leadership created changes that would protect countless future students. The quiet girl who had just wanted to avoid drama had become the catalyst for one of the most comprehensive transformations in higher education culture of the decade. The lesson that resonated far beyond martial arts was that true power came not from privilege or position, but from the willingness to stand up for justice and the preparation to do so effectively. Ashley's epic takedown had lasted only minutes, but its impact would continue for generations of students who would benefit from the safer, more accountable campus culture she had fought to create.